The sun hung low in the alien sky of Corvian, its soft amber glow cascading over the jagged landscape like a strange dream. Beneath it, the colony ship New Earth hovered in the planetary orbit, its sleek, metallic form casting a long shadow over the planet's surface. Inside the command center, Jack Hawk, the commander of the mission, was waking up, or, at least, he was supposed to be. The gentle hum of the cryochamber slowly faded, and Jack's eyes fluttered open. His limbs ached as he stretched, the familiar grogginess of cryosleep hanging over him. The sudden beep of his console pierced the silence, sharp and urgent. He groaned and reached for the controls, his fingers still sluggish as they hovered over the console's buttons. "Commander Hawk," a voice crackled through his earpiece, instantly snapping him to attention. It was Tessa Lee, the colony's lead ecologist, her voice laced with urgency. Jack's voice was groggy. "Tessa? You have 5 minutes. You know I'm not a morning person." "Not the time for jokes, Jack. You need to see this," she said, the tension in her voice unmistakable. He rubbed his eyes. "What's wrong? Did we lose another batch of potatoes?" "No, something much worse. Get to the bridge. We need to talk." The command center. Moments later, Jack shuffled onto the command deck, where Tessa was already waiting. She stood near the large viewport, her gaze fixed on the planet below. The usual excitement Jack had expected to feel when finally seeing the new world was absent. The soft light from Corvian reflected off the glass, casting strange shadows on her face. Tessa's eyes were wide, and her lips barely moved when she spoke. "Corvian is uninhabitable, Jack. It's already fighting back." Jack blinked, thinking he'd misheard her. "What the hell are you talking about? We've been studying this planet for years. It's the perfect place for a new home. All the signs: stable atmosphere, abundant resources. This is why we left Earth. You're telling me it's uninhabitable?" She turned to him, her face pale and tense. "You have to see for yourself." She motioned toward the large holomap of the surface of Corvian, where they had just begun setting up the colony. Jack took a step forward, rubbing the back of his neck. Still not fully awake, Tessa tapped a few controls, and the map shimmered, transforming into a 3D projection. What Jack saw made his stomach drop. There was a patch of land right near the colony's settlement zone where everything appeared to be alive. "Too alive, this is impossible," he muttered under his breath. "The plants, they're growing faster than any known species should be able to." "Exactly. And not just plants. The animals, they're becoming hostile. You remember the old Earth reports about alien life potentially reacting to human presence? This is different. This planet, Jack, it has an active defense system." Jack was silent for a moment, staring at the holographic map. He wasn't sure whether to laugh or swear. "Defense system? You mean like some kind of alien army?" Tessa didn't smile. "In a way, yes." The first sign of trouble. By the next morning, the entire colony was on high alert. An emergency communication had come in from one of the outer exploratory teams. The message was simple, but its implications were clear: an attack. Jack and Tessa were among the first to board the transport ship heading toward the crash site. As they made their way across the surface of Corvian, Jack could see the lush, rolling hills and vibrant, unfamiliar flora that stretched out in every direction. From above, the landscape looked peaceful, almost idyllic, until they got closer to the site of the crash. The transport landed with a jolt. They were in a forested area where the trees towered over them, their thick trunks twisted like spirals of vines. Something about the air here felt wrong. The air was thick and humid, and the sounds of the jungle were muffled, as though the environment was holding its breath. The team disembarked, carefully stepping onto the soft, moss-covered ground. One of the junior scientists, Dr. Mia Patel, led the way, her face grim as she motioned them to follow. "Stay sharp," she muttered, looking around nervously. "We don't know what we're dealing with here." The crash site was a mess of wreckage. A large exploratory rover had been torn apart, and there were signs of a violent struggle, deep scratches on the hull and the ground, as though something had raked its claws across the surface. The crew had been ambushed, but what could have done this? Mia crouched near the wreckage, her scanner beeping. "It looks like some kind of bioorganic material," she said, examining the debris. "These aren't just claw marks. The plant life, it's become aggressive. It's almost like it reached out to grab them." A sudden sound cut through the silence. A rustling, followed by a low, guttural growl. "Get down," Jack hissed, pulling Tessa behind a large rock just as something massive lunged out of the trees. It was a creature, but not like anything they had seen before. Its body was a grotesque combination of plant and animal. Thick vines and moss clung to its elongated limbs, and its face was an insect-like amalgamation of eyes and mandibles. It hissed and snarled, its limbs twisting in unnatural angles as it began to advance on them. Before anyone could react, the creature lunged, its vine-like limbs whipping out to ensnare one of the junior colonists. The poor man let out a scream as the creature's tendrils wrapped around him. His body went limp as the creature dragged him into the shadows. "Open fire," Jack ordered, drawing his sidearm and firing into the creature's direction. The laser blasts barely phased it, but the creature shrieked and pulled back, retreating into the forest. Tessa was breathing hard, her hands shaking. What was that thing? And why was it trying to take him? Jack didn't answer. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of the impossible scene. It wasn't just defending itself. That was hunting. They didn't have time to think about it further. More rustling came from the trees, and they barely had time to scramble for cover as more creatures similar to the first emerged, charging from all directions. Tessa's voice was frantic. "It's not just the animals. The planet, it's reacting to us. We're the threat." The Vilco back at the command center, Tessa was pacing restlessly, her mind swirling with the implications of their encounter. Jack had already briefed the colony on the situation. Corvian wasn't just a new world, it was a living world, a world that would not tolerate human intrusion. "How long do we have before the planet completely rejects us?" Jack asked as he leaned against the railing, watching Tessa's restless movements. Tessa stopped and turned to him, her eyes filled with a mixture of dread and realization. "It's not just rejecting us. The creatures we encountered, those weren't just wild animals. They were sentient." Jack raised an eyebrow. "You're saying the animals are, what, self-aware?" "No. Not the animals. The beings behind them, the Vilco. They're the planet's true inhabitants. They've been maintaining the balance here for thousands of years. And now that we've arrived, they're seeing us as a threat. They don't want us to destabilize the delicate ecosystem of Corvian." Jack's jaw tightened. "So, what this is their way of saying, go home?" Tessa nodded gravely. "We're a parasite, Jack. And the Vilco are the planet's immune system." Tessa's words echoed in Jack's mind as he stared out at the vast, alien landscape of Corvian. The sky was a sickly shade of yellow as clouds churned overhead, almost as if the planet itself were uneasy. He could feel the weight of it. This place was alive, yes, but it was a life he hadn't anticipated. A life that was not welcoming. The colonists were already restless. The sudden, violent ambush had shaken their confidence, but there was no going back now. They had come to Corvian with one mission: to survive. And now, that survival was being threatened by forces beyond their understanding. Jack wasn't about to let fear dictate their future, but he also couldn't ignore the reality. The planet wasn't just rejecting them, it was fighting back with a savage intensity that was only escalating. He rubbed his temples, trying to think, trying to find some solution. The Vilco, whatever they were, had made their intentions clear. They didn't want humans on their planet. And the creatures they sent to defend it were just the beginning. If the planet itself could fight back in such a coordinated manner, what else would it do? Tessa's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Jack, we can't keep pretending like we're just facing a few rogue animals. This is coordinated. This is deliberate. And it's not just the Vilco. The planet is alive, more alive than we can even begin to comprehend. If we keep pushing, it's going to break. Jack turned to her, his eyes hard. You think I don't know that? What's the alternative, Tessa? Pack up and leave? We don't have a ship that can get us back to Earth, and even if we did, we wouldn't survive the journey. We've come too far to turn back now. I'm not talking about leaving, Jack, she said, her tone sharp. I'm talking about survival. Not just ours, but the planet's. Corvian has a delicate balance, one we don't understand. Every step we take is throwing that balance out of whack. If we don't stop, it's not just us that will suffer. It's the planet itself. The Vilco, they're not just defending their land. They're trying to stop us from destabilizing everything. Jack clenched his jaw. And what do you propose we do? Walk away? Not walk away, but we have to find a way to coexist, she said, her voice softening. The Vilco are ancient. They've been here for longer than any of us could fathom. They're not just creatures defending their turf. They're protectors, guardians of Corvian. And if we don't find a way to respect that, we're all going to be caught in a battle we can't win. Jack was quiet for a moment, his mind racing. The idea of coexistence felt naive, even to him, but Tessa was right about one thing: pushing back with force wouldn't solve anything. If Corvian's ecosystem was as delicate as she said, they might not just lose the planet, they might lose everything. All right, he finally said. We'll talk to the Vilco. But I'm not making any promises. Tessa nodded, the weight of the situation clear on her face. We don't have much time. They've already shown us what they're capable of. If we don't make a move soon, they'll wipe us out before we even know what hit us. The next few days were tense. Jack called a meeting with the colony's leaders, a group of military officers, engineers, and scientists. The mood was grim as the latest attacks had only grown more frequent, more violent. They had lost several people already, and while the others were on edge, Jack was determined not to let panic take root. Tessa, as expected, advocated for diplomacy, even though the idea seemed increasingly far-fetched. She spent hours poring over old records about the Vilco, searching for any clue that might give them an edge. Jack, in turn, began considering their options. If they were to approach the Vilco, it would need to be done carefully. They couldn't afford any missteps, but there was one problem no one was talking about. Corvian doesn't have a history of evolution, Tessa had mentioned to Jack during one of their late-night talks. I don't just mean that it's stable, I mean that no new life forms have ever emerged here. It's as if evolution itself has been frozen. Jack had heard about the planet's strange stasis before, but it hadn't quite sunk in until now. Corvian's ecosystem was locked in place, with no new species emerging. Everything that lived on the planet seemed to be perfectly balanced, untouched, unchanged for millennia. No new life forms. No natural progress. The planet was, in a way, frozen in time. And then we show up, Jack had said, half to himself, as he gazed out the window. A whole new species, with our technology, our demands. No wonder they're pissed off. Tessa nodded. It's not just us. It's the changes we bring with us. Agriculture, construction, resource extraction, it all disrupts the flow of this world's ecosystem. The Vilco, they're the guardians of that balance. They're the ones who've been keeping it all together. They're not going to like what we've been doing, are they? Jack had asked, his voice dark. Not in the slightest, Tessa had replied. By the fourth day after the attack, things had gotten worse. A massive storm had rolled in from the horizon, bringing with it unnatural winds and an eerie, pulsating energy that seemed to disrupt all electronics. The colony's power grid went down, and in the dim light of the emergency backup, Jack received an urgent transmission from one of the survey teams working near the outer rim of the settlement. We've lost contact with them, the comm officer said, his voice crackling with static. Something's not right. We're getting readings of, well, it's hard to explain. The environment itself is shifting. The air, the soil, it's like the planet is reconfiguring. Reconfiguring? Jack repeated, confused. I mean it, sir, the comm officer continued. The ecosystem is rearranging itself. The flora and fauna are responding in ways we haven't seen before. Jack's mind raced. If what the officer was saying was true, this was no mere defense. This was a transformation, a full-scale alteration of the environment. Get to the site, Jack ordered. And send a team to check the bioscanners. We need to know what the hell is going on. As soon as the transmission ended, Jack turned to Tessa. This is it, isn't it? They're not just defending themselves anymore. The Vilco are forcing the planet to change, to adapt. Tessa's eyes were wide with concern. They're fighting back on every level. It's not just about protecting the land anymore. It's about survival for them, for Corvian. They see us as a threat to everything they've worked to preserve. Jack ran a hand through his hair, trying to make sense of the chaos. The storm, the shifting ecosystem, it all seemed so intentional. We need to move fast, Jack said, his voice cold. If we don't do something soon, we're going to be wiped out by the planet itself. And when that happens, it won't just be the Vilco doing the killing. Tessa took a deep breath, her eyes focused. We can still negotiate with them, Jack. We need to prove we're not a threat. We need to show the Vilco we can work together. Jack exhaled sharply, his mind still processing the magnitude of what they were facing. Fine. We'll make contact. But I'm not going in blind. Not again. The night was darker than usual. The colony was on lockdown, with all non-essential personnel confined to their quarters. Jack, Tessa, and a small group of scientists prepared to make their way to the designated meeting point, a remote plateau that had been marked as a possible site for communication with the Vilco. There, amid the strange and twisted flora of Corvian, the fate of the colony would be decided. As they moved through the thick underbrush, the wind howled in their ears, and the strange, haunting calls of alien creatures echoed in the distance. The tension between the settlers and the planet had reached a breaking point. Every step they took felt like it could be their last. It wasn't just the Vilco they had to worry about now. The planet itself was evolving around them, shaping itself into something neither the colonists nor the Vilco could fully control. And if they didn't act quickly, it might be too late to save anyone. The forest was dense, but ahead, Jack could see a clearing. And standing at the center of it, bathed in an eerie blue light, were the Vilco. They moved carefully, each step deliberate, every noise from the shifting leaves amplified in the tense silence of the forest. Jack could feel the sweat trickling down his spine, a cold and uncomfortable reminder of the peril they were walking into. Ahead of them, the clearing opened up, its eerie blue glow growing brighter. It wasn't natural. No light should shine like that under Corvian's two suns, especially not in the middle of the night. Tessa's voice was a whisper at his side. This is it, Jack. The Vilco, they're waiting. Jack nodded, his jaw tight. He couldn't help but feel a prickling unease at the thought of meeting them, these beings who, until now, had remained as myth, as shadow. But now, standing on the edge of their domain, he felt their presence like an electric hum in the air. The clearing was surrounded by trees, but they seemed different from any Jack had seen so far. The trunks were wider, their bark smooth and almost metallic, shimmering faintly under the glow. The air smelled strange, rich and damp, like the deep forest of an ancient world. It wasn't the scent of decay, but something more primal, more rooted. As they stepped into the open, the figures of the Vilco came into view, standing motionless in the center. They were taller than any human, their bodies slender but imposing, wrapped in what looked like organic armor made from woven vines and stone. Their faces were a series of alien, shifting features, eyes large and reflective, skin a deep shade of green that blended with the surroundings. They were like statues, too still to be real, too perfect to be anything other than ancient, otherworldly guardians. Tessa moved forward slightly, her voice calm but clear. "We come in peace. We need to talk." For a long moment, nothing happened. The Vilco remained silent, their eyes never leaving the humans. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath. Then, one of the Vilcos stepped forward, its movement graceful and fluid, almost like the wind itself had taken shape. It extended a hand, and Jack instinctively flinched, his fingers tightening around the grip of his weapon. But the Vilco didn't attack, it simply gestured, a slow, deliberate motion. "You've come." The voice of the Vilco was not spoken, it reverberated in their minds, its resonance deep and unsettling, like the earth itself was speaking. "You've come to break what was never meant to be broken." Jack swallowed hard. "We didn't come to destroy your world." "We didn't know." The Vilco raised a hand to silence him, its long, slender fingers motioning toward the sky, toward the glowing pulse of the planet's energy. "This world is ours. It was ours before your kind even knew how to reach the stars. And now it is ours again, to save or to destroy." Tessa stepped forward now, her voice urgent but respectful. "We know we've disrupted the balance. We're not here to take over. We can learn to live with the planet, with you. But we need your help. We can't survive here unless we work together." There was a long silence, and Jack felt his heart pounding in his chest. They were being judged. Not by the Vilco, but by Corvian itself. The atmosphere seemed to shift with the unspoken tension, the air growing heavier, as if the planet itself was listening to their words, waiting to decide if they were worthy of its mercy. The Vilco spoke again, its voice an echo that filled the clearing. "Your kind is a plague. A disease that spreads, leaving nothing but destruction in its wake. You take, and you never return. You harvest, but you never plant." Tessa's gaze softened, and she took another step forward, her hands open, palm up in a gesture of peace. "We don't want to be a plague. We just want a chance to coexist. We've learned from our past, we know what we did wrong on Earth. We want to do better. We've learned that we can't take without giving back. We want to help the planet, not hurt it." For a moment, it seemed like the Vilco would reject her plea outright, but then, the one who had spoken before slowly lowered its hand. Its eyes narrowed, studying them with a strange intensity, and Jack felt the weight of that gaze deep in his chest, as though the Vilco could see inside him. "You are not the first to arrive," the Vilco said, its voice soft but sharp, like a blade cutting through the air. "You are not the first to bring your machines and your demands to this world. But you are the first to show any respect." Jack was taken aback by that. He'd expected hostility, or perhaps an outright refusal. But the Vilco's tone wasn't one of outright aggression. There was a kind of reluctant understanding there, a possibility, just a flicker that they might be able to bridge this divide. "What do you want from us?" Tessa asked carefully, her voice steady despite the uncertainty in her chest. The Vilco's figure seemed to flicker, as if the light from the planet's strange pulse was passing through them. It was an eerie, almost ghostly movement, and Jack couldn't help but feel that they were staring at something that was far older, far more powerful than anything they had imagined. "You will leave this place," the Vilco said, its voice calm, but there was a weight behind the words. "Or you will stay. But if you stay, you will learn to be part of Corvian. You will become part of the ecosystem. You will no longer be invaders." Tessa nodded immediately. "We'll stay. We're willing to learn, to work with the planet. But we need your help to survive. If we don't, if you do not adapt, you will die," the Vilco interrupted, its words falling like a verdict. "Your kind will never survive here as you are. If you do not change, Corvian will change for you. And you will not like the result." Jack felt a chill run through him at the Vilco's words. The planet itself was not a passive entity, it was alive, responsive, and if the colonists couldn't adapt to it, they would face consequences far worse than death. It was a warning, a subtle threat wrapped in the guise of a prophecy. And Jack realized just how close they were to losing everything. "We understand," Tessa said, her voice quieter now. "But we need guidance. We don't know how to be part of this world. We need your help to show us how." The Vilko stared at them for what felt like an eternity, its ancient eyes scanning them as if measuring their souls. Then, slowly, it spoke again, its voice almost a whisper, "Then you will learn. But remember this, Corvian is not kind to those who take without giving. You must change. You must become one with the land, the creatures, the air. You will work for this world. And if you do not, it will consume you." The ground beneath them rumbled, a low, deep vibration that reverberated through the clearing. The trees around them seemed to stir, their branches swaying despite the absence of wind. Jack looked around, feeling the shift in the atmosphere. The planet was alive, listening, responding. It was as if Corvian itself had acknowledged their presence, not with hostility, but with an unsettling finality. The Vilko stepped back, its movements slow and deliberate. "Return to your settlement. Begin your work. And remember, you do not belong here. You are guests, only guests." The air grew thick as the Vilko turned, their forms melting into the shadows of the forest. Jack felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of awe and terror. They were dealing with something beyond human comprehension, something that had been here long before they ever arrived. The Vilko weren't just protectors of the land, they were its stewards, and they had no intention of letting the colonists undo the delicate balance of Corvian. As Jack and Tessa turned to leave, the clearing behind them felt impossibly quiet. The light from the planet's pulse dimmed, and the forest around them seemed to draw back into the darkness, as though the Vilko had never been there at all. But Jack knew the truth. Corvian had just issued its ultimatum: adapt, or die, the end.